Hello and welcome to Spirit and Roots. My name is Dan Raza and this is a show dedicated to the best songs and songwriters from both sides of the Atlantic. Each episode we talk to a special guest about their musical journey and ask them to share with us what it means to be an artist and make music. And we are so lucky to have as our guest tonight Mr. Wizz Jones. Wizz was one of the key players in the British folk revival and is considered one of the finest acoustic guitarists this island has ever produced. Over the years, Eric Clapton, Rod Stewart and Keith Richards have all named Wizz as an important early influence, and in 2019 Wizz received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the BBC Folk Awards. Wizz is now 82 years old and partially retired from performing, but he still plays the odd concert, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in our interview coming up, as well as asking him about his journey in music, the songs that have influenced him along the way, and his approach to songwriting. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. But we're going to get the show rolling tonight by playing one of Wizz's songs that was recently performed in concert by Bruce Springsteen, and it's a favourite of mine. This is our guest, Wizz Jones, with When I Leave Berlin.
Comes and I leave Berlin, my mind is turning, my heart is yearning for you in Berlin. In Amsterdam I'll see my lady, I hope she'll love me, I hope she'll want me when I leave Berlin. I hear today that the wall is open, there are flowers alongside the guns. I hear today that the gates are open, mothers are weeping with their sons. When morning comes and I leave Berlin, I'll know for certain that I'm a free man when I leave Berlin. Today that the wall is open, there are flowers alongside the guns. I hear today that the gates are open, mothers are weeping with their sons. When morning comes and I leave Berlin, I'll know for certain that I'm a free man when I leave Berlin. In Amsterdam I'll see my lady, I hope she'll love me, 'cause I'm gonna need her when I leave Berlin. When I leave Berlin. When I leave Berlin. When I leave Berlin.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard our guest Wizz Jones with When I Leave Berlin. And Wizz joins us on the telephone now, all the way from South London. Thank you so much for talking to us, Wizz. How are you doing?
Hello, Dan. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm up here in my little loft at the top of my little house in Balham.
Lovely. So Balham, for people who are listening from outside London, that's kind of south-west London, is that right?
Yes, it's near Clapham, between Clapham and Brixton. Was once a very working class kind of area, but it's, of course, like everywhere in London, it's become very gentrified now. It's not the Balham I knew when we first moved in.
I can imagine. Actually, one of our previous guests on the show is a fellow Balham resident. You probably know him, Geraint Watkins.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I know Geraint.
Yeah.
He lives just round the corner to me. Yeah.
Oh, does he? Yeah, the Balham alligator himself.
That's right, yeah.
So your website says, Wizz, that you are partially retired now, but I know you recently played your first live concert since 2019, and I wanted to ask you, how was that?
Well, it was great. I mean, it was a very small venue.
Yeah.
We had about 25, 28 type sort of people. And Simeon, one of my boys who plays sax, he came along, and one of my grandsons came along, played guitar. And it was really nice. I mean, I was a bit worried because I did a couple of things. I think we did one spot at the Folk Awards in October 2019. We just did one song. But apart from that, I'd not sung for 2.5 years, whatever it is. So my voice I've lost a bit of my voice, I've noticed. It's a bit thin now. Aside from that, though, it was a great success, yeah.
Wow, that's lovely. And how has it been sort of performing after all that time? So during lockdown, did you pick up the guitar much and sing at home, or was it completely sort of inactive in that sense for you?
Well, anyone would tell you I'm not a dedicated musician. I'm not like Bert Jansch was, get up in the morning and play guitar all day. I just kind of dropped into this business really by accident, really. And I must admit, for the first year of lockdown, I didn't do anything. I didn't touch the guitar, I don't think. But as time went by, I did sort of push myself a bit, start to come up with a couple of songs, and then when I always needed incentive because I cancelled a lot of work.
Yeah.
I had quite a bit of work lined up that had been moved from one year to the next year. But I was hiding, I mean, I was scared. I mean, I'm old and I've got lots of things wrong with me, lung-wise and heart-wise. I didn't want to go out there. So I've just been hiding for the last couple of years. But as long as there's a local gig, if there's a nice local gig that isn't too far, I'm still driving, but I can't drive long distances anymore. So I'm just, I really am retiring in a way. But then, of course, what happens is once you do stop, you think, oh, I'm really missing this. When I did the gig the other night, I thought, oh, this is great. When's the next one? I thought, oh, shit, there isn't another one.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to sort of keep your hand in, like you say, sort of announce your partial retirement, but that gives you still scope to kind of put your foot back in the water as and when you want.
I don't think Simeon's going to allow me to stop playing. He's going to keep coming round here with the sax and harmonicas, saying, come on, let's work out some stuff.
I love that. Well, I wanted to go back to the very beginning and sort of ask, when did you get your first guitar, Wizz? And then when did you start writing songs and performing for the first time?
Well, I've never really been a songwriter. I started, obviously, in the 50s, around 1956, something like 57.
Right.
I'd been listening to the radio a lot. My radio was my thing. So I knew all about jazz and whatever folk there was out there and whatever blues there was. But as you probably know, there was this thing in Britain called the skiffle.
Jack a diamond, Jack a diamond, Jack a diamond is a hard car to find.
And the silver lining to skiffle, I mean, Lonnie Donegan, who I couldn't stand, but he got very famous, and he did help people get turned on to where the music was coming from. And it opened up the live scene. I mean, I was a jazz fan, supposedly, but it was only the lifestyle. I mean, I was lured to Soho from my little home in Croydon, down in Croydon, which Croydon in those days was rather like a separate town to London. It was still fairly rural in a way in the 50s. So I used to go up to Soho, and there were all these live music clubs with skiffle bands playing, strumming away. But it was exciting, and I'd go to the jazz clubs. And so what happened was I left school early, and I got a job in a warehouse, in a textile warehouse. And there was a guy working there, and he came in one day with a guitar, and he was telling me all about this Soho scene and how exciting it all was. The job was sort of in the city. It was a very Dickensian building where you had to clock in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it was really Dickensian. And he brought this guitar in, and in the lunch break, he got it out and he strummed 3 chords. Jung, 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 G, C, D, you know?
Yeah.
And to me, that was the most amazing sound. I'd seen and heard Big Bill Brunsey on the radio, and I'd seen a clip on TV, and I'd listened to Ewan McCall singing all the traditional stuff on the radio. But to actually hear this live strumming, I thought, that's a wonderful sound. I'll have to do that. So I got the first guitar, which was what we used to call the 10 guinea special, which was a load of old rubbish, obviously.
Yeah.
And I learned to strum, you know. I just sort of learned to strum with my hand.
Yeah.
And I immediately thought, right, I heard all these skiffle bands. So I got together with friends and I formed my first skiffle group. But of course, I'd been listening to more country music, Hank Williams and Brunsey and all this stuff. So our repertoire was quite sort of quite a mixture, you know, of country music and stuff. So we had this band called the Wranglers, and I managed to persuade my local pub in Croydon to let me get up with my band once a week, you know, and that's how I started, you know. I really didn't know what I was doing, and none of us knew what we were doing, you know.
Wow. And when I read these accounts about people like Keith Richards and Eric Clapton saying that you were an early formative influence on them, are they talking about this period when you had this skiffle band? Was that when they were seeing you perform?
It would be later than that. It
Right.
would be the early 60s. By then, I was actually kind of out there busking and sort of playing around, and I guess they were art students. I used to play at a club in Croydon in the afternoons, once every week on a Sunday, called Under the Olive Tree. It was a coffee bar with a place upstairs, and I was a kind of resident there, and we used to book people like Long John Baldry, who was around at the time, and Davey Graham was just starting out. And I know that all that lot, Clapton, all those people used to come down in the afternoons. I didn't know at the time, but I was told later that they were all there. And it's nice to think that you inspired people. I mean, they went on and did it all properly. I mean, like Rod Stewart went on and really did it. You know, I mean, those early records with Rod singing all that stuff. I thought, that's great. You know, it's the kind of thing I would have loved to have done. But, you know, I was never really, you know what I mean? I was always on the edge of it and never took it seriously. I mean, I did it for a living. I was busking because I didn't have anywhere to live at the time. So, you know, I was forced into it, and I just followed all my heroes across the channel and did all that stuff.
Well, we're going to get on a little bit more to Paris and Soho shortly, but before we while we're still in the sort of area of talking about your formative years playing music, you've spoken a little bit about, you know, you play with your son Simeon, and I know your grandson, you say, also joined you on your latest gig. And I just wondered, were your parents also musical?
No. My mother thought she was musical. And I think my dad did play the trumpet in the army at one point. I don't know. It's all a mystery to me. But I just followed the crowd, really. I mean, I just went on the busking trip down to Brighton and stuff, and it was to break away from the really humdrum, you know, working class background of, you know, it was pretty gloomy in the 50s. I just wanted to get away. I mean, I don't blame my parents in retrospect. You know what I mean? But it was pretty miserable, and all you wanted to do was break out and reinvent yourself, you know.
Wow. It's so interesting what you're saying, because and you just talked about going down to Brighton and busking. And recently I came across for the first time this legendary Alan Wicker documentary from the 1960s, which is on YouTube. And I know you've been asked about this many times, but for those people who haven't watched it, I recommend you find it on YouTube. And it features you as a young man busking in Cornwall and being asked about your beatnik lifestyle, and you famously saying it that the only thing you're interested in at that time in your life is playing guitar and traveling around. And as we're going to go on and explore a little bit more in this interview, that is what you did with your life. But, you know, we're talking about you growing up in the 1950s where life does seem like it was very black and white. And I know a lot of kids in the UK felt like that, you know, that sense of kind of repression, and that's kind of almost a theory why the 60s ended up like they did, because that explosion of colour was a kind of reaction to that. But I wondered, was that quite a radical thing for you to say back then, that, you know, the only thing you were interested in doing with your life was playing guitar and travelling around? And with that in mind, how did your parents feel about that? How did they feel about you saying you wanted to pursue a life sort of as an itinerant folk musician?
Well, I mean, I don't blame them. Their attitude was, you know, you've got to leave school and go out and get a job and bring some money into the house. You know, I don't blame them for that. That's what they knew. And to see this ragamuffin guy, you know, behaving badly. I mean, it's quite embarrassing, because although I was actually 20, I was behaving like I was about 13 or 14. I was very naive. In fact, I am still very naive. I've never really ever grown up, you know, to be honest. And I've got away with doing the minimum of everything, really. I managed to bring up a big family and everything. But, you know, I mean, I was just a silly boy, really, you know, being silly. You know, like Alan Wicker says to me, you know, you're just doing this for attention. I said, no, I'm not. Of course I fucking was, you know. That's the whole point.
So how did your father, like, because we're going to talk a little bit more in a second about your father when we talk about your song Burma Star, but, you know, your father came back from the war and he was the one presumably saying, you need to go out and get a job with. So what was it like?
What do you think he thought of me and my little brother? He'd been tortured by the Japanese, and he'd been on that railway of death, you know. He'd been in a prison camp for 4 years, and he was lucky to survive. And he came back, you know, to this little cozy situation, you know, these two milksop little boys, you know, and he couldn't, you know, they're traumatized, those people. He couldn't really kind of relate to me. I just saw him as a very cruel person, and we never really had anything to do with each other. I mean, I did find out afterwards that he used to play my albums to his friends when they came round. So secretly he was in a way proud, but we never ever had any communication whatsoever, you know. I got on okay with my mother, you know, but I mean, and I don't blame him for that. It wasn't until he'd gone that I realized just, you know, how hard it must have been for him, you know.
Wow. So this song we're going to play now, Burma Star, it focuses on two pivotal events in your life: the night your father came back from the war in 1945, and then the night he passed away in 1979. And you said you didn't have like a particularly close relationship. Sounds like a difficult relationship, understandably, you had with your father. And with that in mind, was this a hard song to write? Was it therapeutic? Was it something that you had sort of brewing in your in your consciousness for a while? Tell us how you came about writing this song, will you, Wizz?
Yeah, well, I'm not a songwriter. I've written one or two songs and that's it. And I'll tell you the reason why later. But I can't remember how I wrote it. I probably wrote it very quickly. And it just, I don't know, I think I wrote the story first for some BBC website that was talking about stories from the war and childhood. And I think I wrote how, you know, this strange man who I didn't know who he was, and he couldn't really communicate. And I have this memory of the next morning walking up to him and saluting him, you know, trying to sort of, you know, make some communication. And his reply was, "Oh, what are you trying to be funny?" You know what I mean? And I mean, in retrospect, I can't blame him for that, you know. And I suppose I can't remember how I wrote the song. All the songs I've written, I wrote very quickly. I think I know how I wrote the tune. I'd been playing a Doc Watson version of "Oh Me Wise" in A minor, where you capo the A minor chord at the 5th fret, like an E minor up 5 frets. And I had that riff from "Oh Me Wise," and I just was playing around with that. And I had another chord that I'd seen Alan Tunbridge, or I'll talk about later, play this other chord, and I put the two chords together, and I kind of had the melody, and I'd written this sort of a little paragraph about the story of him coming back, and me sitting there with the water in the bowl in front of the fire, and she went out to the door to answer the door, and I got really frightened because she didn't come back.
Wow.
I just heard all this muffled crying at the door, and I thought, oh dear, what's going on? I was frightened to get up and go and see what was happening. You know, I was only 7 years old, something like that.
Wow.
So I sat there with my feet in the bowl, and obviously about 45 minutes went by, and when she finally came in with this strange man and saw that I still had my feet in the cold water, she said, well, why didn't you, get the towel and wipe your feet and everything? I was just frightened what was going on, you know. So I'd written that little story. So I guess the song came out of that, and I played it to Simeon, and he came up with a really nice saxophone part that echoed the feeling of the words, you know. So that's how it came about. And he got this, the only thing he got was this medal that everyone got who served in Burma, was just a little medal. I never saw the medal because, knowing him, he probably just sold it or pawned it or something. It probably meant nothing to him, you know.
Wow.
What the hell are you giving me a bloody medal, you know? And so one of my grandsons actually went out and bought one from an antique dealer somewhere and gave it to him, which I thought a very, very touching thing to do, you know. But it was just the idea that all he got. I mean, he'd fought for his country. He'd been a boy soldier. He was an orphan, you know, and he joined the army when he was 12 or 13, and he was out in India, and he was in Malaya and all these different places long before the war started. So he was just all his life a Tommy Atkins private, you know. He never got any further than private. And he served his country, you know, and all he got was this bloody medal.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's probably what the Burma Star was about. I don't know. It's tough, isn't it?
It is tough. Wow, but it's an amazing tribute, and it's such a touching song. So thanks for taking the time to give us some more context to that. This is our guest, Wizz Jones, with Burma Star.
Night that my dad came home in 1945. The night that my dad came home, oh how my mother cried. She was washing my feet in a bowl by the fire. I must have been about 6 years old. A knock at the door, and that was the night no bedtime stories were told. The night that my dad came home, so lucky to be alive, listed as missing in 42. Oh how my mother cried. Out on the porch for an hour or more, underneath the red, white and blue. Me waiting inside with the water so cold, I didn't know what to do. 79. The night that my daddy died, oh how my mother cried. 30 odd years in different jobs, he never ever seemed to settle down. Losing his money on the horses and dogs, and gambling all over the town. The night that my daddy died, in a hospital bed by the door, I was a man with an easy life, never had to go to war. You asked me for a photograph, he didn't leave much for to show. Just a Burma star in a tobacco tin and a broken radio.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard our guest Wizz Jones with Burma Star. So Wizz, we already mentioned how you spent time in Cornwall, traveling around with your guitar, but I also know that you spent an extended period in the early 60s on the time-honoured Buskers Trail from Paris to Marrakesh, and I wondered, could you share with us a little bit what that time was like for you?
It's funny because we all kind of followed our heroes, and people like Alex Campbell had gone over to Paris, and a friend of mine, Mike McSoftly, who I knew, we really just, and we'd read all the books and everything, so we knew it was the place to go.
Yeah.
So we weren't being very original, but we just followed that scene, and it was so the whole lifestyle was so different. I mean, London now is very cosmopolitan and very, very continental, but it wasn't like that then.
Right.
I mean, you couldn't get, the kind of restaurant terrace thing, and I don't know, it just wasn't the same then. And so you'd arrive there and you could just hit Paris. You didn't have to have any money, you could just lodge your passport at a seedy hotel on the left bank and you could go out and work. But that all sounds very romantic. I mean, I think most of us, the first time we did it, we couldn't hack it.
Because you were literally living hand to mouth, right, when you were out there. It wasn't like you went over there with like pockets full of money or credit cards like people might do now when they travel.
Yeah, and there are other people that used to come over in the summer,
right?
From students, and that we used to get very kind of annoyed about that because they come along and steal our cinema cues. There was always a lot of competition.
Yeah, well, with that in mind, obviously the stakes were so high, like you say, because, you're trying to pay for your room and board alone and your food just to get by. But then you've got these other, all other kind of musicians from all different backgrounds also trying to do the same thing or, trying to make money. So did that kind of raise your level, did you find? The fact that you were kind of trying to stand out and trying to get people to put their hand in their pocket and give you money. Yeah. Did you find that when you came back to London later, which we'll get to in a minute, did you find that you came back a different musician to when you first went out?
Yes. Well, everyone will tell you, a bit of busking certainly sharpens you up, Yeah. And you've got to entertain people. There's no use being too arty-farty. You are there to entertain as well. And I mean, when I used to do the cinema queues in the Latin Quarter, all the students were queuing up to see all these arty black and white films, which we'd then go in and see afterwards when we'd finished that queue, and they sort of laugh as we join the end of the queue after we'd finished and then go into the cinema. But by then I was playing Big Bill Broomsey. It was freezing cold, and I had steel finger picks on my hands, and I was playing blues and bluegrass and blues stuff. And most of the buskers were playing rock and roll or just strumming three chords. But I managed to sort of play more kind of, what I wanted to play and actually make an effect, without just sort of compromising too much. But one does have to compromise to some extent. So anyway, I'm digressing here and waffling as usual. Too much wine again.
No, it's fascinating. So okay, we kind of got that then. So I can see how you sort of evolved, the artist that is Wizz Jones was evolving as a musician. So you came back to London in the mid 1960s. And this was a different England that you came back to than the one we saw in the Alan Wicker documentary. Okay, so you came back in the mid-60s and things were already exploding, right?
Yeah, I'd missed the boat. You know, someone said to me, hey, there's a band over at the Eel Pie Island and they're playing all the stuff you play. They're playing all this Muddy Water stuff. I said, oh, yeah, they're called the Rolling Stones. But wow, that sounds good. You know, I'd seen Rod Stewart. I vaguely knew him, you know, only vaguely. You know, we used to sort of spark off each other. And he by then he was recording, and I heard this record. I thought, bloody hell, you know, it's all going on, you know. And there were loads of folk clubs everywhere. I mean, when I left, there were a few folk clubs, but not many. I hooked up with one of my friends, banjo player Pete Stanley. I hooked up with him, and we suddenly found ourselves working 6-7 nights a week all over the country playing in folk clubs. It kind of just happened without really planning it, really.
If the river was whiskey and I was a duck, got to the bottom and I never come up, tell me how long must I have to wait? Oh, can I get you now? Must I hesitate?
So this was a good time to be an acoustic troubadour in the UK then, when you came back.
It was, yeah. I mean, there wasn't a lot of money around, but if you worked a lot, you know, it was you could get by. Yeah. But I don't know. It all evolved really, and to be honest, those years I kind of missed out a bit. I had my head in the sand. I was sort of doing folk clubs and bringing up kids, and I kind of missed out on the ligging bit where you hang out, you know.
Interesting, yeah.
On the scene, you know, people. There was a whole crop of guitar players coming through who were like 4 or 5 years younger than me, and they were on the scene, you know. And fair dues, they were great players. They were much better players than me, you know. But I kind of wasn't really there, you know. I was kind of working out up and down the country playing bluegrass music with this banjo player.
Yeah.
And in a way, I kind of missed the boat. But that was only my own personality. You do what you do.
Yeah. And you have to make sort of compromises, like you sort of referred to earlier, you know, in terms of raising a family and being a good husband.
Which, of course, I probably wasn't. You know, that was it. I mean, you try and do it all, and it doesn't work. Oh. You know, it's not easy, you know. But I know, you know, I've got no illusions. I know that I get a lot of hyperbole. People going on about, you know, Wizz, fantastic guitar player. I'm not. It's a load of bollocks, you know. I know where I fit and I know my strengths, you know. There's so many fantastic musicians out there. And when Bert Jansch hit town, you know, it was unbelievable what he was doing. It was bordering on genius because that kind of thing had not been done before. Davey had kind of started it, and Bert took it a step further, and he combined traditional music, and he came up with a guitar style that hadn't really been there, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, he did shake everything up, you know, really put you in your place, you know. And then later people like John Martin, you know, they were fantastic musicians, you know. So given all that, I'm lucky that I still carried on working, you know, let's be honest.
Yeah, but I haven't said all of that. Bert Jansch, who I agree and everyone will agree, was an incredibly talented musician. He said about you that you were the most underrated guitarist ever. So, you know...
Well, yeah, I know people say that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I know where I'm at.
But you've played.
And it's personality. People do what they do, you know.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Wizz. I hear you. Well, we're going to get on to the next song in a second, and you played with many great accompanists over the years, and we're going to play a recording of you and John Renbourn performing "The Glory of Love" together. And I just wondered, could you tell us briefly what it was like to play with John?
Well, there's a story by that. I mean, I didn't know John. I used to play the folk clubs, and he used to be in the audience. He was at art school, and I didn't know who he was. And then one day I had a gig in a folk club somewhere, and he got up in the interval and he played all this stuff off the Davey Graham album. I thought, Christ, this kid's good. And over the years, I did get to know him, not that well. I did some work with him, you know, and even with Simeon, my son, the three of us did some work together. But it wasn't until we finally met up at the end. He'd been working with Robin Williamson from The Incredibles. And that kind of fell through. And John's agent said, well, what do you want to do now? I said, well, I've been doing some stuff with Wizz. Let's do a few tours, just me and Wizz together, you know. And that's when I really got to know John. And the thing was that those tours we did, they were wonderful because we really got to know each other and we were really relaxed. And the way that it worked was John would play a set, and then I would do some solo numbers, or we'd go on stage together, and I'd play the odd solo. And the track we're going to play was part of my solo spot. And I started to play Glory of Love, and John just decided, oh, I'll play along on this. And halfway through, he starts playing with me. And of course, it wasn't organised, it wasn't planned or anything. And in fact, I stopped too soon, in fact. But when I listened to it afterwards, I thought, that's got a great feel to it, a great atmosphere of John just picking up the guitar behind me and just playing along, you know. And I thought that really captured up our relationship. I thought, well, I must put that on the record because it's got such a relaxed atmosphere. Nothing was planned, and he just jammed along, you know, and it really did capture what we were about at the time. Yeah.
And am I right in thinking that John died shortly after this album came out?
Well, no, before the album came out, we were touring, and it was a tour. It was near the end of a tour, and we had a gig to do in Glasgow. And the day before we finished off the album, and I said, well, I'll see you tomorrow in Glasgow. And I went back to the Travelodge where I was staying, and he went back to his place, which was about an hour or so away, down by the borders. And our plan was to rendezvous at the gig.
Right.
And then when I got to the gig the next day, he wasn't there, and he still didn't arrive. So I tried ringing his agent, and I couldn't get through. So I left a message saying, John hasn't shown up, you know, you better find out, because he lives on his own in this place miles from anywhere. And, you know, he'd been ill over the years on and off, and he was carrying a lot of weight, and I think he had a weak heart. And so I thought maybe something's happened, you know, because the next day we were due to drive on to Wales from Glasgow. And so I got the agent to ring me in the morning. He said, well, what's the matter? I said, John never showed up. So he said, well, I'll call the police over there. And they went there and they found him. He was on the floor. And so he died in the night. And so I was starting out to go to the gig in Wales. So obviously I stopped and went back to London. That was the end of the tour. It was all very, very sad. But at least we'd finished it. The very night before, that night, when he got back to the Snoot where he was, and I got back to the Travelodge, he phoned me. That's right, he telephoned me on my mobile.
Yeah.
And said, "Well, I've just finished online." I went online, and that last track that we were doing, with the engineer, we did a few tweaks to it, and it's all finished now. So the album's all done. But of course, it didn't come out until quite a few months later, in the following year, probably. I can't remember. But yeah, it was very, very sad. But it was nice that we got to know each other finally.
Yeah.
Really well, you know.
Yeah.
And he was a good guy, a good, generous guy, like Bert.
Wow. Well, let's give this a spin now. This is such a great choice you came out with. Yeah. This is Wizz Jones with John Renbourn performing The Glory of Love.
Give a little and take a little. Let your poor heart break a little. Ooh, that's That's the story of, that's the glory of love. Sigh a little and cry a little. Let the clouds roll by a little, oh baby. That's the glory of love. Long as there's the two of us, we have the world in its charm. When the world is through with us, we'll have each other's arms. Sigh a little and cry a little. Let the clouds roll by a little. That's the story of, that's the glory of love. Take it, John.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard Wizz Jones and John Renbourn with The Glory of Love, which is taken from their album Joint Control. So we've talked a little bit, Wiz, about your songwriting, and it's interesting. I was reading a quote earlier from the writer Colin Irwin, and he said, while Wiz's songs are always sublime, they are relatively rare, and you've kind of concurred with that yourself by saying you don't write a lot, which is interesting. But it seems like you're a big supporter of other songwriters, and you're also somebody who's you seem really open to singing other people's songs. Is that right?
Well, part of my personality, I see it in my son Simeon,
Yeah,
is as much as I enjoy him playing and listening to the applause, most enjoyment I ever get out of anything is actually turning people on to something, promoting a gig. You know, I'm a frustrated promoter.
yeah.
So really, I didn't need to write songs. I didn't feel a kind of desire to write songs. And luckily, I had this friend from Soho who was part of the scene. He finished art school and he was working in an advertising agency, which he hated. But he was writing poetry, and I vaguely knew him. And that summer of 1959, when I went to Cornwall and worked in hotels, when you could do that with long hair, you could actually work in hotels then before all the shit hit the fan in the 60s. And Alan came down too, and we got to know each other down there, and he was writing poetry, and we started to set the poetry to music, to guitar. I taught him 2 or 3 chords.
Yeah.
And then when we met up again in the 60s in London, he taught himself to play the guitar from listening to me play, and he'd learnt all the same sort of styles and everything. And he'd watched chord shapes and chord sequences that I was playing, and he'd crafted all these wonderful songs. And he wasn't really a performer, and he didn't want to play professionally. So I had this kind of doorway into this secret world of all these songs he was writing. And they were very subtle, and I couldn't really copy them exactly the same way. So in a way, I kind of watered them down a bit, really, and made them more accessible. And half the time, I didn't understand what they were about. But I felt they were original melodies with great words and tunes.
Yeah.
So over the years, I recall whenever I made an album, there had to be an incentive to actually make the album and try and get a company to put it out. And that incentive was usually some of Alan's songs. And you could say, well, there's publishing here. Maybe we can get a record. And then I might tuck in a couple of my own, you know, as well. But it was really Alan's stuff I was championing. And a lot of people thought I'd written them because they didn't believe this guy Alan Tunbridge existed, you know. But he sure did. And Magical Flight is one of his lovely songs, you know. I'm singing very young on that recording, actually, but it's a nice take with Pete Berryman who was my favourite accompanying guitar player, who was from Cornwall, who I've recorded with over the years many times, and a cello player called Sandy Spencer, who was over here at the time. Yeah, it's a lovely song.
It's a gorgeous song. It's a gorgeous recording and a gorgeous arrangement that you made. It's one of my favourite of your records. But also, yeah, the song itself, beautiful harmonic movement in the chords and a gorgeous melody, like you say. And I'm also not totally sure what the whole meaning behind the song is, but there's something like super evocative about it. I feel like I know what it means, even if I don't quite understand with my brain, if you know what I mean. And sometimes that's a nice feeling. So let's give this a spin. This is Wizz Jones with the title track from his 1977 record, Magical Flight.
Easy way, rivers flow round every hill on the ground that is in the way. Like the glistening glide of a shark as he swims in the dark on a summer's day. Neurotics in elegant poses criticize the dawn. A child reaches out for some roses, leaving blood on a thorn. Are you ready tonight for a magical flight? I don't know where, but it's gonna be good to get there. Let me look at your face, a mysterious place. Water and wine, shadow and shine all in one. See the easy way flowers grow round on the old battleground where a million died. Like the red and blue banners we made for a May Day parade through the countryside. Young lovers lay down in the midnight cold city room. A tawny owl swoops in the moonlight, just a moment too soon. Are you ready tonight for a magical flight? I don't know where, but it's gonna be good to get there. Let me look at your face, a mysterious place. Water and wine, shadow and shine all in one. Like a nightingale, like a killer whale, like a sycamore tree, like a clown with his face in a frown as his trousers fall down to his knee. I find you in craziest places, just a smile and you're gone. You leave
enough to lead on. Are you ready tonight for a magical flight? And I don't know when, but it's gonna be good to get there. Let me look at your face, a mysterious place. Water and wine, shadow and shine, all in one.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard Wizz Jones with his rendition of Alan Tunbridge's song Magical Flight. So we've reached that time in the show now, Wiz, where we ask our guest to choose a track to play by an artist that's influenced them, and you chose Brown Skin Woman by the great New Orleans bluesman Snooks Eaglin. So tell us why you chose this song and what Snooks' music means to you, will you?
It's simply the way Snooks is singing, and what impressed me was he was obviously busking at the time when he was picked up by this guy, Dr. Harry Oster, who recorded him on a reel-to-reel tape recorder in a hotel room. And what impressed me was the feeling in his voice. He'd obviously listened a lot to Ray Charles, and he owed a lot to the whole gospel New Orleans thing, you know, and that's what got me. And it really influenced me. I thought, if only I could sound like that, a little boy from Croydon. Not possible, but if only I could, you know.
Yeah. Well, you sort of mentioned that he was busking at the time, like yourself, when he made this record, but he obviously was on the pavements of New Orleans, and he was known as a human jukebox, right? Because he was, you know, I read this, that he was adept in all kinds of genres.
He was.
And, which kind of made me think of what we were talking about with you in, you know, on the streets of Paris in front of the cinema queues. You know, he had to be diverse and know his crowd pleasers, I guess, in order to sort of, you know, keep his head above water.
Yeah.
You know, I've always loved his guitar playing as well. I love how he's got that sort of walking bass going on, almost like a pianist, and he's a cracking player. So I'm really glad you chose this, Wiz. This is Snooks Eaglin with Brown Skin Woman.
I love my baby, but she don't love me. Well, I love my baby, but she don't love me. Tell me what's the matter. Where can my baby be? Brown-skinned woman, who can your good man be? Brown-skinned woman, who can your good man be? Well, you told me that you love me. Tell me, where can you be? Well, you said that you love me. I know it was a lie. You told me that you love me, baby, and what's the reason why? Yeah, I love you. Oh, I love you. Yes, I love you, baby, but I don't care what you do. Brown-skinned woman, who can your good man be? Brown-skinned woman, I want to say, who can your good man be? Well, you know that I love you, but you're so untrue to me.
You're listening to Spirit and Roots, and we just heard Snooks Eaglin with Brown Skin Woman. So we're coming to the end of our interview now, Wiz, and I have one final question for you that we ask to all our guests on the show.
And what would that be?
Yeah, here it is. That question is, if you were to curate your own dream concert lineup with a headline artist and 2 opening acts, none of whom have to be alive, who would you pick? And before you tell me that, I also want you to tell me where you would want the concert to be, what venue or place in the world, and that can be anywhere from your kitchen in Balham, South London, to Carnegie Hall. Where would you want this dream concert of yours to be? It's your choice.
Well, my old stamping ground is the Half Moon in Putney,
Yeah.
the pub where many of us all played many, many times and still functions to this day,
Does.
albeit having to put on a lot of tribute bands to make ends meet. But nevertheless, it's a good room. Doesn't hold many people, 200, 300, I don't know. And it will be no surprise to you when I say I would love to have the Ray Charles Orchestra, complete with the Raelettes and all those hornmen, all on stage, top of the bill. That would just be a joy.
You know the night time is the right time to be with the one you love now. Oh, baby, now. Yeah, come on, baby. I want to be the one I love now. You know what I'm thinking of. I know the night time. Whoa, it's the right time to be the one you love now. I said to be the one you love. You know my mother and the diver and my father.
Did you ever see Ray Charles perform? Wiz?
I didn't see him, but I heard him over the wall in Monton when the jazz festival was on, and we were outside. Obviously couldn't afford to go in, but I could hear his voice ringing out. And no, it was Antibes. It must have been Antibes, yeah.
So was that in the 60s?
Yeah, I remember saying to my girlfriend, look, Ray Charles is on.
Wow.
And he'd been on in Paris, he'd been on the famous Paris place. I forget what it was. I was sitting in a bar in Paris, and one of the girls who knew came running in and said, I've just seen Ray Charles at the Paris Olympia. That's right, the Paris Olympia. Wow. And I said, I wish I could have been there. She said, it was fantastic. Anyway, that's Ray Charles. Support act?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know about this, but my grandson, Alfie Jones, who plays the guitar, told me about this band, Tuba Skinny. They're a whole band playing New Orleans jazz, and they've got some great musicians in the band. They've got a really good girl singer, in fact 2 or 3 good girl singers, and they've got a great trumpet player or cornet player was related to a very famous jazz man. His name I've forgotten.
You can have my husband, but please don't mess with my man. You can have my husband, but please don't mess with my man. I'm telling all you women, I want you all to understand.
Tuba Skinny, and they were busking in the streets of New Orleans. In fact, they still do. But they've obviously got lots of albums out now, and they made one recently with Maria Maldor, who guested on the album with them.
Yeah.
So that would be Tuba Skinny. That maybe I'd have them to finish the show, and then in the middle, I would have Madeleine Peyrou, because I love the way she sings, and I love the way she plays guitar.
My days, they are the highway kind. They only come to leave. The leaving I don't mind. It's a coming that I crave. Pour the sun upon the ground and stand and throw a shadow. Watch it grow into a night and fill the splendid sky.
She's so jazzy, you know. But that's the sort of thing I go for, you know. A really cool jazz singer, and she can play jazz guitar well too. as well.
Great choice. So she would be with a band, are you saying, Madeleine?
Well, she'd be good solo. She can play solo with just acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
She could just play solo guitar. Because her mother was quite a musician, I think. She was half French, half American, I think. I don't know. But anyway, she busked in Paris in the early 80s, I think. She was busking in Paris before she was famous, yeah. Madeleine Peyrou,
Wow,
wonderful.
great choice. And how cool would that be at the Half Moon of Putney, I tell you?
It would be dynamite.
It would be dynamite. But can you imagine Ray Charles at the end of the night in that little room? Wow.
Yeah.
That would be steaming up in there.
And the Raylettes.
Exactly. They just about fit on the stage, I reckon.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Wizz, it's been an absolute honour to speak to you. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us tonight.
That's all right. I enjoy a waffle.
Yeah. Well, we enjoy hearing you waffle. Before we let you go, can you tell everyone listening where's the best place to find you online, Wizz, and get hold of your music?
Well, I guess YouTube is the best place, isn't it? I mean, it's all loads of stuff on YouTube.
Are you still selling records? So are you still selling CDs?
Yeah, I've got a few, but most of my fans have got my records, you know. So I haven't got any new ones out. So.
Yeah. And is there any plans in the pipeline, maybe to have a new record?
Well, there's no gigs booked. I mean, right. I did that one the other night, which was a great success.
Yeah.
But there's nothing booked. If anyone comes up with something local,
yeah,
I might venture out. But I'm still a bit wary. I'm waiting for this bloody virus to die. It could take some time.
I know. We're just going to have to see how it all turns out, I guess, with all that. But I'm glad you're getting to do the odd thing anyway in the meantime. And I'm really glad that you got to speak to us tonight, Wizz. Thank you so much for making the time to do that. And thank you, everyone who's tuned in and joined us here tonight. We really appreciate it. You've been listening to Spirit and Roots, and our guest this evening has been the one and only Wizz Jones. We're going to be back again next month with a special 2-hour Christmas show, so make sure you keep an eye on Facebook for updates on that. But until then, take care everybody.